Okay, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the parish of St Lawrence. Thank you for taking the trouble to turn out this evening for the Senatorial Hustings. I need just to explain the format of the evening so that everybody is clear and understands. First of all, we have 10 candidates who will make a speech which can last for a maximum of 3 minutes. My senior procureur, Mr. Mike Ethelston, is sitting at the table to my left, and he is our timekeeper this evening.
Oh my God.
And doesn't he do it well? 20 seconds before the end of the 3-minute speech, we will hear the bell sounded. Questions will be taken in blocks of 2. And to explain that, it means that 2 people will ask 1 question, and the candidates will then answer those 2 questions. They will have a maximum of 2 minutes in which to answer those questions. And again, the warning bell will be sounded 20 seconds before the end of the 2 minutes. The candidates will reply in the order in which they have drawn themselves this evening. And after each question, we will start with the next candidate along. So as you can see, we have the candidates in order are number 1, Sarah Ferguson, number 2, Mary O'Keefe Berger, 3 is Guy DeFay, 4, John Young, 5, Mike Dunn, 6, Nick Lecornu, 7, Christian May, 8, Sam Mezek, 9, Hugh Raymond, and 10, Stevie Ocean. And I can confirm that those are the names by which they wish to be addressed this evening. So before we start, if anybody wants to log into Wi-Fi, we have it in the parish of St Lawrence, and the password is gridiron. I'd like to ask you now to turn your phones off, please, but obviously if you have iPads, you can use those. And the other thing is that candidates will either choose to stand or remain seated. This is their hustings. It is up to them what they do. I'm merely here to chair it on their behalf. So as in just about every parish, someone is in the process of turning their phone off. As in all other parishes at other hustings, I will take questions initially from parishioners only. When parishioners have had enough, and I don't see many of you here this evening, I see supporters, and I know there are people from other parishes. When everyone here from St Lawrence has asked as many questions as they want to, we will then, if we have time, take questions from guests to our parish, okay? So please don't put your hand up initially if you live anywhere other than St Lawrence, because I won't accept a question from you. When you do ask a question, I would like you to stand, please, give your name, and confirm that you do live in the parish, so that everyone here this evening is comfortable that we are doing this correctly. Are there any questions from, first of all, the audience? No? Okay. Are there any questions from the candidates? Okay, so we're going to have a lively debate this evening. We'll enjoy it, won't we? And so we're going to, I am going to remain seated. Okay, so I'm going to do that now. And I will call on Sarah Ferguson to address us for 3 minutes. Thank you, Sarah.
My leaflet is on your seat, and it's full of very interesting information about women. Well, it might put you to sleep. But anyway, it's there with my principles as well. Now, people are complaining that the Council of Ministers aren't listening to them. Apart from your excellent Connétable, I worked with her on scrutiny, and she's mustard. My besetting sin is that I ask the simple stop and think questions. My committee challenged the ministers we scrutinised, the Chief Minister and the Treasury Minister. I was chairman of the Corporate Services Scrutiny Panels for 35 large reviews. We brought amendments to significant propositions, including one to the first medium-term finance plan, reducing expenditure, which was agreed with the Chief Minister without debate. The front page of the JEP tonight highlights the necessity of controlling immigration. My scrutiny panel produced 35 reports, as I've said, and 3 of these were on population, the latest in 2014. In the 2012 strategic plan, the Chief Minister committed to undertake a post-implementation review of the new population law. We're still waiting. They talked about the new manpower process enhancing the effectiveness of controls. Really? Growing businesses who are not in the finance industry are finding it impossible to get licenses, despite a promise that support would be provided. We advised the Council of Ministers that the interim policy was not new and there were no real controls. Similarly, with the draft 2015 budget, we called for a full debate on tax and expenditure policies. Agreed. But the right time is before the next medium-term finance plan, or rather, after the impending election. We said that further work was needed to establish the scale of the structural deficit. We were told to refrain from making judgments until the next medium-term finance plan, after the next election. I wonder why. Our advisors commented that if the States was a private company, a profits warning would have been issued. The real problem for scrutiny is that ministers agree with the recommendations, but they don't actually implement them. The time remaining in this session is short, but it's still possible to make a difference through scrutiny, questions, and propositions and amendments. We can use this time to question ministers and to continue holding them to account. Please remember, your vote is your voice. Please use it, preferably for Sarah Ferguson, but you must use it.
Thank you, Sarah. I call Mary O'Keefe-Berger.
Thank you. Good evening. My name is Mary. I'm a centenaire, a businesswoman. I sit on the board of directors for the Jersey Opera House, and I have a property company. I have run festivals, dental and medical practices. And by the way, I've had the toughest job of all, and that was being a mum. And now my children have flown the nest. I believe in positive politics, with a can-do attitude. Not moaning or dithering, but getting on with it. What can I do? What can you trust me with? I have been explaining over the last few evenings about my legit strategies. These are law, equality, good housekeeping, immigration, tourism and trade. Tonight I would like to talk about the economy, or good housekeeping as I'd like to call it. In 2014, our economy grew by 5%. And average earnings were up by 0.9 percentage points. Our reserve fund stands at 786.5 million, and this is all good news. However, states' expenditure is running ahead of income, and that is not good news. In 2014, expenditure exceeded income by 76.4 million, and in 2015, the excess was 49.5 million. It has come down, but more work needs to be done. This is no way to run an economy, let alone a household. The 3 areas I see that need attention are increasing income, taxes, and expenditure. And how do we increase our income? We can't just rely on our first-class finance, tourism, and agricultural industries. We need to diversify our economy, support Digital Jersey, new, innovative products, generating high levels of income with low levels of staff, assisting the setting up of new businesses for Jersey, such as an international arbitration centre for arbitration conferences and dispute resolution in neutral jurisdictions. Taxes. Where is our awaited tax review? A simple place to start might be 010. For non-finance external companies, these companies pay tax anyway, so why not pay it in Jersey? Companies like Boots, the Radisson, de Gruchy, all their corporate tax is paid off island. Why? expenditure. I want to metaphorically knock down the walls of Cyril Lamarckand House. There's a silo mindset in the states of Jersey, meaning that departments do not cooperate well together. As a result, 2.2 million pieces of data are stored in respect of a population of 100,000. Don't hide behind data protection. The states, apart from the police, should be one department for record keeping and record sharing purposes. There we have it in a nutshell, ladies and gentlemen. There's plenty more to discuss, plenty more details on my website, which is mary.je. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for listening to me this evening, and I do hope you'll consider giving me your vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. I call Guy Defay.
Thank you all for being here tonight. Thank you, Madame la Connétable. Well, we've got ourselves into a bit of a pickle. When I joined the first Council of Ministers back in 2005, there were two ministers in that particular team who said, if there's one thing we must do, it's stick to the budget. I was one of them, and coincidentally, the other one was Senator Filipozov, who happens to be in the room tonight. And the reason we said that was because we knew at that time that we were staring at a potential structural deficit in between our income and outgoings. Well, within weeks, the Education Department turned up and said, terribly sorry, we seem to have made a slight mistake in the calculations. We forgot about tertiary education. We haven't got any money for the student grants this year. And actually, we should actually mention that we forgot last year as well. Makes you wonder why we ever bother with budgets, but it got worse than that because in fairly short order, we were approached by the health department. The department knows that any time it asks money, it gets it because it's the most popular on any voter's list. £12 million, please, for a new IT system. We were treated to an extended presentation, at the end of which a very senior person came in and showed the Council of Ministers two slides. One was his old car, which he said, this is like our existing IT system. One was his new car. This is where we want to go. This, a presentation to £12 million. We allowed it to go ahead, and with some horror several years ago, I saw that the health department had come back and asked for another £12 million. This is what we've been up against, and that's partly why you're now looking at a structural deficit of roughly £145 million, and all the other add-ons you need to think about as well. The money we are applying into Andim on loans, the money that's going X, Y, and Z. Now, what is the basic problem? How can we sort this all out? The big problem this island faces is the number of people who live here. We've been trying to pour a quart into a pint pot for years. It hasn't worked. We have too many people. That's why we have so many cars on the road. That's why there's pressure on public services. That's why we're having to build new primary schools and ultimately new secondary schools. Pressure right across the board. And in order to fix it, because it all costs money, you're being asked to pay more tax. Things have to change. And I believe that I am the candidate who can deliver the change that we need. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Guy. I call John Young.
Thank you, Connétable. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Now, the person elected will have just 20 months in office before the general election. And my experience in the private, public and voluntary sectors will enable me, if I'm elected, to hit the ground running. During my 3 years as a State's Deputy, I brought 21 private members' propositions and amendments. Half of those were approved. I lodged over 119 questions and held ministers to account as chairman of a scrutiny panel with many reports, which were acted on. Now, what we've seen is that the Council of Ministers have become out of touch with the public. And as a result, we see the public losing confidence. And I think we need a new direction. And I can offer that new direction. But my challenge is not just about style. Public spending is not under control. The wrong people are getting hit by the cuts. gardeners, cleaners, frontline workers. Voluntary redundancies, in my experience, means that we lose some of our best people. Vital childcare for working families and pensioners' benefits have been cut. And yet, while we've seen £5 million reaching a decision on the hospital, and yet where's the sign? There's no sign of the promised review of our tax system agreed by the states 2 years ago. And yet what's happening? We have proposals to rack up the tax on Middle Jersey. And then without a mandate, there's a proposal to introduce charges, which are really tax increases in disguise. And there has been no progress in reforming 010. And so we got the profits of non-resident corporations, has been mentioned, who trade locally, disadvantaging local businesses in many ways. And immigration, I think the Council of Ministers has given up. And we see planning to build on open spaces in town and dense town cramming housing developments being promoted, which will damage the quality of town life. Now that will lead to affecting the country areas like the beautiful St Lawrence in time. And of course, chief officers have protected their empires for decades, and their layers of management, I think, have imposed bloated costs on frontline services, which those services have had to suffer cuts year after year. And the PAC report recently demonstrates the need to dismantle the silos. We can't afford huge chief officer salaries, pensions and golf trips and so on. So we have to freeze tax increases and halt new charges until our house is in order, and we need a senator who constructively challenge, and we need leadership. If I'm elected, I will bring forward propositions to require a rethink and freeze new charges. I've no extra ground, no career to pursue. I resign my employment if I'm elected. I promise to work hard for you. I ask you to trust me to vote. I won't let you down. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for listening.
Thank you, John. I call Mike Dunn.
Yes, good evening too. I've got a bit of croaky voice. I went into a shop today and the lady said, you're the Brexit man. So I could have been introduced tonight as the Brexit man. So I was quite flattered to be recognised, as people know that I'm running this campaign on this one specific issue. And that's why I want to be elected to the States. Basically on this one issue. It doesn't mean I won't do other things and act for you in all the ways as a senator should do. But this issue, Brexit, and we all know what it means in general terms, the United Kingdom's leaving the European Union. But we don't know what's going to happen to us because we're not in the European Union. We've got a special deal which was negotiated on our behalf, basically, back in the 1970s. And it's an outworn arrangement, Protocol 3. Nobody really knows what it means now. Nobody knows who owns it. Nobody knows who can negotiate on it. And the world has changed dramatically since the 1970s. 9 countries then, 27, 28 countries, depends whether the United Kingdom are in or out, I don't know what they are at the moment. All those voices, all different voices of view. And bear in mind, when that was set up, Jersey, Guernsey and the Isle of Man all went in on Protocol 3, much of a muchness. Now it's different. Our needs are not the same as Guernsey, and they're certainly not the same as the Isle of Man. Isle of Man's not next door to France. Different scenario. So what's going to happen? We don't know what's going to happen. The United Kingdom government has basically got about 2 years to get it a bit sorted, what they're going to do, the basics of what the new arrangement's going to be. This vacancy is for 2 years. That's exactly what I want. 2 years only to go in the States, form a Brexit group and get it organised so that the people can have a voice, express their views. The fear is, there's quite a strong fear here, that independence will one day be declared. If the people of Jersey want independence, all well and good. But I don't want independence for Jersey. I don't think Jersey is capable of being an independent territory. People have got to be consulted. They've got to express their views, all manner of views. That's why I'm going around as well and set up a Brexit group with the status of a senator, so I can go off to the Isle of Man, I can go off to Guernsey, not with my golf clubs, I hasten to add, and I shall negotiate with the people there and find out what they want, speak to them, speak to whoever will speak to me, to try and find out and form groups here so that everybody, finance industry, farming industry, tourism industry, people with no industry at all, so that they can express what they hope will happen from Brexit. At the moment, we don't know. We simply do not know. When Senator Balash came back to scrutiny, and I go to most scrutiny meetings, he said that this decision was off the earthquake scale. But, he said, we've been planning for it for 2 or 3 years. So what have they been planning? Why have they been planning for this decision? Why did somebody know? Is there somebody's got huge insight in what goes on in the world that they knew we were going to come out? If you vote for me for 2 years, that's all I'm going to go. I won't be there afterwards. I shall pack in, you pay me for these 2 years, and I will do my best to consult with all of you, get all your views, and present them so that we know what's going on. I shall find out what's going on from the government, here, there, and everywhere, tell you, consult with you, and hope we can influence any decisions which are made.
Thank you, Mike. I now call Nick Lecornu.
Good evening, I'm Nick Lecornu. One of the reasons for standing is, and it's in an expression, propaganda by the deed. The purpose of my standing is to bring to the island politics that are not generally heard, because these voices of the people from whom I would wish to speak are not heard, they are the ignored. So I say I'm an anti-austerity candidate, standing on behalf of working people, pensioners, and the poor. There aren't probably many here tonight, but there may be some listening to the videos that will go out on the internet, and they will understand that there is a candidate who's prepared to fight for their social interests. Now, what does austerity mean? And if you take anything away from my speech tonight, it's one thing, it's this. Austerity is a policy designed to protect the incomes of the wealthy. I'm not speaking on their behalf. That's the Council of Ministers doing. I'm speaking on behalf of the working people whose voices are not heard and who are suffering. And I met them today. I went canvassing at Le Clos de Fort, up Pier Road, not far away from the State's building, but 1,000,000 miles away in terms of worlds. And there I met a woman. She's working in a care home. And at the end, no, let me put it this way. After she's paid her rent, she is left with £53, not per week, but per month. I was shocked. I've also spoken to a lot of pensioners, because that's one of the nice things about going around at that time of the day, is one meets the pensioners who are in, and they say they're just getting by, with the emphasis on just, because their rents are going up, their pensions are pretty stagnant, and certainly from the States of Jersey, those pensions are not moving. I want to send out a very clear message. If you elect me as senator, I will fight for the interests of working people. But we do have some elections coming up in 20 months' time, when we can, hopefully, in a significant way, change the whole complexion of the states. Maybe not radically, but at least we can elect more people who will fight on behalf of the interests of working people. Thank you.
Thank you, Nick. I call Christian May.
Thank you, Madam Connétable. Good evening, I'm Christian May. It's a pleasure to be here in St Lawrence, and it was a pleasure to walk through the Monyard Liberation Garden and see what I'm assured is the best pétanque pitch in the island now. I was born and educated in Jersey before studying law at the University of Nottingham and have worked the last 10 years in a local law firm. I had the privilege of chairing a local equality charity, been an invited governor of Rouge Bouillon School, and founded the West of Town Community Association. I also had the privilege of leading the Save People's Park campaign, bringing together members of the public, campaigners and states to achieve a common goal. I'll bring the same success from working in the public sector and working in the community to my role in the States. I believe the States needs a new candidate, someone who's not had the opportunity to bring their ability, skill and perspective to the chamber. And I'll be a fresh pair of eyes with a fresh perspective. I've made 10 key pledges in my manifesto, and they're aspirational but achievable, and represent a real commitment to the island across the next 2 years, and I'm ready and willing to be judged against them. I want to ensure all island students have access to university funding, want to challenge draconian measures in our health law, and want to optimise the use of states' assets without an increase in taxation. I want our island culture celebrated and protected, want to ensure that we are prepared for changing environmental factors and give voters the chance to use online to vote in future. My congratulations today go to all the AS and A-level students getting their results. However, whilst this is rightly a day to be happy, there will be many students who can't celebrate because, despite positive results, their families simply can't afford to send them to university. One of the prime roles of government should be to ensure that every student, whatever their background, can pursue a university education. That the number of applicants to universities from the island is falling because of that funding gap is shameful. We need a thorough re-examination of our grant system to support the support it provides and how it's managed in future. We need a working group between the states, the banks and private equity to pursue the provision of a fair loan scheme. And we need to look at offering more on-island university-level education for subjects wider than just finance, that will not only provide for local students, but attract students from England and wider afield to invigorate our economy. I want to be a fresh, new voice in the States Assembly that can make a difference through scrutiny, debate and constructive criticism. And I hope you will consider giving me your vote on the 7th of September. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Christian. I now call on Sam Mezek.
Thank you, friends. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Sam Mezek and I've been the Deputy for St Helier No. 2 for the past 2.5 years now. During the 2014 general election, ministers stood on these hustings platforms and told you that our public finances were the envy of the world and that if they were elected, they would promise to keep taxes low and that they'd rein in wasteful public spending. Looking back at that and knowing what we know now, I believe it's impossible to reach any conclusion other than this, and that is that you were lied to. Just weeks after they were elected, we found out that actually they'd racked up a public spending deficit of £145 million, and straight away they began drafting up their plans to cut public services and introduce new taxes, all of which they'd actually pledged to be against. In the past year, they've cut £10 million of support from the disabled, from broken families and from pensioners, despite our shocking statistics on the proportion of pensioners living in relative low income. All whilst this happens, it seems that it's every week that we get a new report that comes out about the out-of-control spending of senior civil servants and consultants on themselves, and report after report tells us that ministers are too beholden to their chief executives and are not focusing their efficiency savings at the bloated management levels. So instead, they're asking all of us to pay the price for their mistakes. They plan to introduce a new health tax with exemptions for the wealthiest islanders so that they won't have to pay the full rate. They plan on sacking hundreds of workers providing frontline services for the public whilst leaving those bloated management levels unscathed. And this is actually being spearheaded by one of your own deputies in this parish, Eddie Knoll, who said during his election for TTS Minister, and I quote, "I do not intend to reduce that 500 workforce at all. In fact, it's going to go up." Promise broken. And if you speak to many of these ministers privately, even they will actually tell you that they know that the States is not going to reach its own targets on deficit reduction. So I think the timing of this by-election is perfect because it offers you an opportunity to cast a verdict on the performance of the Council of Ministers before they go ahead with the next phase of these plans. So I'm standing in this by-election because I want to seek a mandate from the whole island, not just St Helier, for an alternative vision to the one being proposed by the Council of Ministers. And that's a vision based on fair taxation, protecting our public services, and ending the civil service gravy train, which is bleeding this island dry. My record shows that I'm not afraid to stand up to the Council of Ministers, and if I'm elected in this midterm election, it sends a message to them that they've lost the public's support and they must change direction. So if you share that vision for a politics that works in the interests of the many and not just the few, I hope I can count on your vote on the 7th of September. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sam. I now call upon Hugh Raymond.
Good Good evening, Conatop. Good evening to you all. Can I first of all congratulate you on your 2 floats? There is a reason for saying that, but especially your junior float, which did very well, and the work that was done on it and the hard work that goes into it. However, you're not there to listen about the battle, but it is important because it's very much part of every parish involvement. As you probably know, I know some of you in this room, I'm the president of the Honorary Police Association. I'm also a chairman of the Sports Council and deal a lot with the state's members. I'm also this year been made a board member of the Battle of Flowers. However, we're not here, as I said, to discuss that. The major thing that we're here to discuss, that over the last 4 or 5 years, all of us have suffered with regards to overspending. Countries, households, and Jersey was no exception. And this is now being borne out because the medium-term plan will be put into place over the next couple of months, and this will affect everybody. And in fact, I have been slightly involved with regards to the discussions, with regards to the Home Affairs Department, with regards to policing. If you start cutting back on policing, does that take a big effect on the honorary police, which this island has very proud to be? I'm sure there are logical and reasoned answers to a lot of these questions, but with the medium-term plan due to be confirmed, it is important, and I think that it would be foolish for any of us to turn around and say on this top table that in 2 years you're going to change anything in that sense. But you need somebody in the House that can ask the questions and hopefully get some answers. 2 years, that plan has been set. It's going to be a very difficult time. But the major thing in this island is no different to anywhere else. Education, health, taxation, job security, immigration, elderly, and the housing department is the most important factors of it. It will be a big learning curve for me, I make no bones about it, and it would be silly to say that I will be able to change anything in this short period of time. But I've had 25 years in the finance sector, and I have done a lot of volunteer work. Again, another vitally important part to this island, St. Lawrence or any parish. The volunteer sector is what keeps this island going. So I'm asking you on the 7th of September to consider somebody who has the experience, the knowledge, the integrity to act for all voters who reside in this wonderful island of ours. A fresh approach, I guarantee. There's no baggage and a desire to see Jersey back to where it belongs, and that's the envy of many small jurisdictions. Remember, all of you, it is your island, it's my island, but fundamentally, it's our island. Thank you.
Thank you, Hugh. And finally, I call on Stevie Ocean.
Yes, good evening, Conatop and ladies and gentlemen, nice to see you. Before we start, I'm going to remain seated, not out of disrespect, but something happened at St Mary's last night. I decided to stand up, and it was a disaster. Because I'm 6'2", unfortunately, everybody could hear me, but I couldn't hear myself. And if you go on Vote JE, you'll see a total professional turn into a total amateur. And have a good laugh about it, I don't mind. Anyway, let's continue. First of all, I'm your establishment candidate. I'm truly a man of the people, a team player with a safe pair of hands. Now, what I want to do is work with the council and ministers and using tact and diplomacy to achieve one main goal that we got to do, and that is an immigration policy. That is a priority that we have to sort out immediately, and I want to be the person to be able to do this for you. I mean, your concerns are my concerns, and everybody needs to work together to make this island greater. We've got a lot of potential in this island which we don't see and which we could use, and that's the basis of what I want to do in the States of Jersey. Now, to continue, our island is only 45 square miles, and we already have a population of 103,000. Now, we could reclaim lands from the sea, but unfortunately, we don't know the environmental damage that we could do, and we really don't want a Snowden situation with sea lettuce. Our services, our public services are under strain. Our schools and other services are under pressure. And there are 400 people to one police officer on this island, so it works out per capita. What we need to do, as such, is this. We must have restrictions on immigration, obviously from the point of view of the 5-year rule, which has got to be maintained, and licenses as well. And we've got to protect what we have here. After all, everybody takes everything for granted as such. And when you stop and look at this island, how beautiful it is and what we've got here, it's a beautiful place and a very safe place to live. Consequently, I also want to protect our unique and beautiful island. And furthermore, if you vote for me on the 7th of September, vote for Ocean and keep the island afloat. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Stevie. So now we come to question time. The candidates are looking to finish this evening by about 9:30. So I didn't say that earlier. When you ask a question, please ensure that it is generic. It is a question that all the candidates can answer. You do not direct questions to one candidate in particular. I think that's the only thing that I need to say about the questions. I've done a rough head count of parishioners here. It's a pretty poor turnout, actually, although I can't see everyone, and I don't know everyone here. I think we've probably got about 20 parishioners here this evening. So I think enough to actually satisfy ourselves with questions from them. So are there any parishioners here who want to ask a question, please? Okay, I saw Nick Palmer first. Before I ask you to ask your question, Nick, just to remind everybody that the first person to answer this evening will be Sarah Ferguson. So we'll start with Sarah. Every candidate will answer the question. For the next set of questions, we'll come to Mary O'Keefe-Berger, and we'll keep doing that, okay? So, Nick, if you can keep your question brief, please.
It's about that long. My name's Nick Palmer, and I live in the far northeast corner of St. Lawrence. I looked at everybody's online manifestos, and bar two, I found no mention of your policy on climate change or the large influence it will have. Was this an oversight, or do you consider it an unimportant side issue?
Okay, the second question that I saw was Jason Cronin. So can we have the mic passed to Jason, please?
Excuse me, Constable, we actually had a question from this gentleman last night, at the Hustings last night.
Okay, well,
Thank you, Mary
Jason,
O'Keefe, for actually allowing me to...
Thank you, Jason. Can I ask you to sit, please?
Well, I'm a parishioner.
Yes, you are. Please sit whilst I confer... Thank you, Jason. I'm chairing this meeting. Please let me confer with the candidates. Can I just check, please? This is a parishioner. I would be very happy for him to speak clearly. I just want to check that everyone else is happy. Sarah? You happy? Di? John? Is everybody happy that this parishioner asks a question? Okay, thank you. In that case, Jason, there is only one objector this evening, so please go ahead and ask your question.
This parish allows people not of this parish to ask a question, which I took the opportunity last night at St Mary's. But objection noted, Mary O'Keefe-Berger. Good evening, senatorial candidates. I'm a middle income earner. The introduction of indirect taxation and increased cost of living, as well as no pay rise in the last 2 years, has taken a considerable toll on my disposable income, which affects the microeconomy. But it's not just myself as a middle income earner, but those on lower wages and also pensioners who have contributed perhaps 40 years are now expected to pay a health tax in the future.
And your question is,
And the
Jason?
question is, the Council of Ministers proposed that the wealthy are capped. Now, if elected, would you support the Council of Ministers' proposal for a health tax with capping for the most rich in our society.
Thank you. Okay, so can I just qualify those questions, please? We have one from Nick Palmer on climate change, and that the majority of candidates here make no mention of it in their manifesto. Was that an oversight? And Jason Cronin has asked whether you would support a cap on the health tax. Is that correct? Jason, was that your question? Thank you. So we'll start with Sarah Ferguson.
Right. I'll start with the second one first because I think that's the more important question. I agree with you. The stealth health taxes, or the charges, the taxes masquerading as charges, sorry, I want those stopped before we actually impose them. I would intend to, if elected, to bring an amendment to the medium-term finance plan to hold the charges until we've had the tax review, including a review of 0-10, because I think 0-10's days are numbered. It provides an incredible on-island tax avoidance scheme which benefits the very well-off and leaves Middle Jersey carrying over 50% of the income tax collected, and I think that's totally unfair, totally inequitable, totally wrong. Climate change, at the moment, it's not actually clear what causes it, so I would confine my attention to environmental problems that I can do something about. I'm doing some work for Age Concern. I am a trustee of Age Concern. I'm doing some work on gas prices. The Competition Authority have been very useful, and I will be talking with Jersey Gas. And I'm also helping with the organic Le Marais Community Garden project. Not the gardening, that's not me, I do the admin. But we want a community social focus for the flats because they live in a desert. We started using with the Back to Work team. We've got residents coming in to help. It's a super project. It's getting underway, and it's an environmental benefit. So that's my contribution to environmental problems.
Sarah, thank you. I call Mary O'Keefe-Bergen. May I just remind the candidates that they can choose to answer any of the questions, one of the questions, or none.
Thank you. I'd like to address Nick Palmer, please. Thank you. Yes, I recognise the email that you sent me last week was similar to your question, and it's an interesting question. When we had to plan an island-wide campaign, it was very hard putting everything together very, very quickly, and some things were on the manifesto and some things were building up as the weeks went on. So my attitude is we have to protect our environment. I've taken a consultation with the chairperson of biodiversity. I've had some advice from him about how we can be helping. And one of the great suggestions they actually came up with was to introduce environmental policies in schools, so we start teaching our children at a young age about the importance of the environment and how we can protect it for our future. We're actually seeing firsthand now how the impact of our lives is affecting Jersey, and we have the issue with the sea lettuce, which is mainly due to nitrates. So that is one excellent example where we can prove to our children that it's actually very important that we embrace this from a very early age. Now, moving forward, I think it would be definitely worth engaging with the finance industry and talking about green finance. And it's a very specialised subject, but it would be something that an expert would be able to come in and talk to the community about. And that way, it's all about building hearts and minds. It's about getting people on board and getting people really interested and understanding a subject. Okay. And I'll just touch on your taxes if you'd like my answer, but I think you have to have a little review of the expenses before we look into new taxes. I'm not in favour of a tax increase, but everything needs to be reviewed.
Thank you, Mary. Call Guy DeFay.
I actually take climate change extremely seriously. It is a major global problem. But realistically, not just Jersey, but the entire Channel Islands make a very small contribution to climate change. We can have a gesture in the right direction, and there's nothing wrong with that. But in that respect, I would like to see a difference, a change in our approach to our current energy issues. We've had investigations, consultations, and people watch the tide go in and out twice a day. What's happened to our marine energy projects? Why is nothing off the drawing board? Alderney are going streets ahead of us, and admittedly they have the Alderney race to their advantage, but we appear to have stalled at an interesting time. Price of oil is very low now, but it's not going to last like that forever. So this is a time where we really should be constructing our plans. And there's other forms of renewable energy as well. We've got plenty of roofs in this island, but not many solar panels on them. Is that resistance from the JEC? I don't know. But it seems to make logical sense that we're not thinking ahead. Now, there's no time to talk in detail about the particular tax that was mentioned. I've said in the last senatorial elections, it was very clear, back off on tax. Get the government sorted out before you can't start penalising the people for all your waste and your mistakes. Unfortunately, the waste has extended, the mistakes have continued, and we have to find money from somewhere. But I think this needs to be reviewed. Clearly there are problems on the health tax because what do you do with people who are on private insurance? There has to be a different way of dealing with it. But this needs wholesale review.
Thank you, Guy. I call John Young.
Thank you. Thank you, Nick. My detailed manifesto does make reference to renewable energy. In fact, as chairman of the Environment Scrutiny Panel, I produced a major report into our energy policy and persuaded the Minister of the day to take that report to the States, and including many, many commitments. I think it's fairly typical that all those agreements were made by the States, all those policies are there, and what is happening? Absolutely nothing. And there is clearly, I think it is right that Jersey can only make a small contribution, but I think Jersey has an opportunity through utility scale renewables, through offshore wind and tidal, to actually, and in connection with electric powered vehicles, through policies locally, to actually be rather an exemplar in renewable energy, which I think would promote the island and promote us internationally. We're missing that boat. We could spend a lot of time on that. On tax, I think, yes, the gentleman is absolutely right. It cannot be right that we are proposing to have a very crude health tax that will mean that the proportion paid by very wealthy people is less than those on the lower incomes. That is just crazy. But that's only one distortion of this. The distortion has been got through on the long-term care tax. We've got to put up with it. But to add layers on layers of insults by adding the same mechanism, which is, I think, full of injustices, into the health charges too much. We need a review. It's got to include 0-10. We've got about 4 rates of tax. We've got marginal tax, standard rate tax, wealthy people's tax, and the corporations. We've got corporations being disadvantaged with those profits being exported elsewhere, disadvantaged in local businesses, meaning those businesses get sold. And who's paying to subsidise those profits? Income support payment. So frankly, the whole thing is a mess. The states agreed a proposition to review. It should be done. Freeze the tax.
Thank you, John. I call Mike Dunn.
Yes, I'm very sorry there's no Green candidate in this election. I did ask them, I put it on Facebook, why don't you put up a candidate for this election? And I wish there was an environmentalist speaking on all the worldwide environmental issues and put them before the electorate. But like myself, I've got what appears to be one issue campaign. But of course, Brexit covers all these things, and all the environmental issues are dealt with from Europe, the protection, pollution, all these aspects, fishing, overfishing. Bear in mind, we overfished Newfoundland for many decades and fished out all the carp. We're just as guilty as anybody else, historically. So we're not saints in the environmentally around the world, and there's huge problems around the world. We can't solve them all, but we can have our input. And Brexit is It covers such things. There are all sorts of treaties covered in the island plan when John was there. It says in the preface there's over 300 international conventions, many of environmental, are considered when they're drafting of the island plan. I've asked him twice, the new island plan when they came out, what are they? No answer. When Sarah was a senator, I asked her, what are these 300 conventions which were supposed to be confined? Nobody knows. Nobody says. It's just lip service to environmental issues. I understand your frustration, but you should be sitting up here, expanding on them, telling the world what it is. Regards to taxation, the problem is we're trying to satisfy the world on producing a taxation system which suits the world rather than the people who live here, because we're in the finance industry. Again, unfortunately for us, finance is going to be one of the main considerations when Brexit gets going, if it does ever gets going, because they're going to be looking at finance centres all around, the British ones especially, and we are going to be criticised and examined very critically, and things will change. But, you know, that's the bad news.
Thank you, Mike. Call Nick Cornu.
Nick, I think Mike Dunn's got the answer. You need, like I said, propaganda by the deed. Actually intervene in these elections. Bring the environmental issue to the attention of people. Don't leave it, say, well, they haven't put it in there. Tell them what they need to know. Push it forward. You don't have to do it yourself. There's others who are equally capable, who are good speakers, who will do it. On the issue of the economy, the essential problem is the failure of 010. It's the finance centre, isn't it? It's the failure to raise sufficient income from the main industry in the island, which is finance. And as a consequence, it's leading to these structural deficits, and the government has decided that austerity is the best way to deal with it. We'll cut back the public expenditure. But it's a fantasy, because they can't do it, because they've got major commitments to hospitals, to education, and so on. What are they doing? They're putting the burden onto low and middle income earners, those who live by their salaries and by their wages. It's a deliberate policy. As I said, austerity is about preserving the incomes of the rich. Remember that? Take it away. And that's what you're seeing. There has to be a fight back against that, and it will come because people are hurting. I've seen it on the knocking the doors just today to see how people, particularly the working class, is just making ends meet, and they're in a very, very poor state. The rebellion will come, maybe, maybe not.
Thank you, Nick. I now call Christian.
Well, Nick, I'm very glad to say it wasn't an oversight, because climate change is right there in the 10 points I make in my manifesto. The effect of climate change on the island is critical. We have low coastal areas, and as sea levels rise, we need to be prepared for that. The Environment Department had a report prepared in 2015, and it had some quite damning conclusions which said that Jersey is not doing enough yet to prepare for climate change. And since that report was published, we haven't really seen any action on it. We need to be prepared for flooding risk. We need to develop robust infrastructure, especially around St Helier. We need to look at either cutting the number of cars on the roads or increasing the number of electric cars. And as other candidates have said, we need to look at alternate ways of producing energy from tidal or wind. Sarah said that there isn't a clear cause. There's plenty of empirical data out there for what's causing climate change. And respectfully, she said that some of the constituents she was dealing with were living in an environmental desert. Well, we'll all be living in a desert if we don't deal with this issue, apart from those of us who are underwater. When it comes to the issue of the new charges, I don't support any health charges or stealth, as I think your Freudian slip said. I would rather that we make efficiency the key word of the next 20 months and into the next term of the new Council of Ministers. We need to make sure that we're making the most of the assets that the states have. We need to consolidate the buildings so the civil service are working together in one place, and that there is not this silo mentality, but clear budgets being utilised by all. And we need to be efficient with data, so we don't have 2 million records, but core records that mean costs are reduced and efficiency is increased. Thank you.
Thank you, Christian. I now call Sam Mezek.
Oversight or unimportant, it's a very, very fair question, and it is a sad reality that when you only have 500 words for a manifesto, you have to focus on the things which are most pressing in the public's minds, and it's a very sad fact that unfortunately in Jersey it doesn't appear that the majority have too much concern about climate change. That isn't helped by the fact that there are still some people who reject the overwhelming scientific view, which is that climate change is the greatest threat facing mankind, and it is caused by human activity. No ifs, no buts. I am one who fully accepts that science behind it. I think that the long-term ambition of the island should be that we should be looking to be self-sufficient in how we generate energy. We've got huge scope for that, given our natural resources. There's one real problem at the moment, though, and that is that we have a huge deficit, and the ideology of the current Council of Ministers is not one that can be reconciled to the idea of taking part in these big investment projects. The solution to that is to elect at elections as many candidates whose ideology is as far apart from the Council of Ministers as possible, and on this platform, that's me. And I absolutely will do what I can to support the environment. In terms of public transport, it has to be said that it doesn't help if when you want to get people out of their cars and onto public transport, that the current infrastructure minister, who's the deputy of this parish, keeps raising bus fares. That's the opposite thing we should be doing. We should make it cheaper to incentivise people so we can get those cars off the road, which will help our environment. On the stealth taxes, the fact that there's an upper earnings cap on this proposed health tax shows whose side the Council of Ministers is really on, and it's not on the side of Middle Jersey, who they expect to bear the brunt of these taxes that they didn't tell you about before the last election. I will lodge an amendment in the next few weeks to stop the health tax from happening. If you elect me, I will be able to stand on the senatorial benches, incidentally beside Alan McLean, and say, you've lost the argument, the public have rejected this, so withdraw it, and we'll have no more stealth taxes if you elect me as senator. Thank you.
Thank you, Sam. Call Hugh Raymond.
Yes, thank you. Nick, I'm in the process of having a long chat about Lalonde with regards, because I'm vice chairman of the racecourse up there, and we've been talking to the environmental, the department, and it's coming out very well. But it's interesting talking to people like that. You suddenly realise, and I checked on some of the figures, there's something like 32,500 cars registered in this island. We have a population of 100,000. You know how many roads we've got in the island, and yet we have all these cars. I think there has to be a looking at, even to like some of the Caribbean islands, where they're actually reducing the number of cars and the number of petrol-driven cars. I very much stick with my colleagues here in the sense that we've got to look at electric cars, but I'm not quite sure we need so many cars on this island. And I think we really do have to go down the route of sharing public transport and making it much easier. I mean, you only got to look at the avenue in the morning and in the evening, and you see how many cars there are. We're now getting hold-ups, which we didn't do years ago. So I'm very, very keen on the environmental issues, and I think that we really do have to look at it. With regards to stealth tax, I'm very much down the line. What Christian was saying, the problem what I never understand is that why you put a cap on something. If everybody's going to be taxed, why do you put a cap on somebody right at the top end? I mean, they're getting as much benefit as the person at the bottom end. And I think that sometimes, if you could only see the notes and the discussions that went on with the Council of Ministers or with the State's departments as to why they do this, I'm not quite sure. I don't think there should be a stop at certain levels. I also think there has to be a looking at with regards to helping the people at the bottom end, especially with clothing and food. We have GST on clothing and food, and I really do think it needs to be looked at across the board. And that's something that I would desperately bring up. And having a grandchild of 2 or 3 and a daughter, I know what it's like for them to live. So I think we have to look at all these things overall. But the main thing is asking the questions why. Thank you.
Thank you, Hugh. And finally, Stevie Ocean.
Thank you very much, Madam Conatable. Well, first of all, as usual, the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. It seems to be persecution on the way this works, and I think that should be reviewed. Why should the rich always seem to get away with it at the top of the scale and everybody else suffers in the process? It's got to be reviewed and changed, as far as I'm concerned. And that's something else I want to do when I get into the States as well. Now, on the point of view of environment and other things that have been mentioned tonight, unfortunately, certain parts of St Helier have been blocked off, which doesn't help anybody as such, and that's why we're having these bottlenecks in the morning. I know that for a fact. It's not very pleasant at all. There are so many things that we could do environmentally. I mean, electric cars are a good idea, but there again, you're talking in terms of these things are expensive, they're not cheap to run. And the costings that come into it as well, a lot of people couldn't afford it. So they would have to be hired out in the respects of some people using them. And basically, as far as I'm concerned, I mean, that is an option that we have. And that's all I wish to say. Thank you very much.
Okay, so I'm looking for 2 more questions from parishioners, and I've seen Deputy Lafondre and Nick Jewell. John, if you'd like to start, please. Only one, please.
Do they consider that the Council Ministers have adequately demonstrated a commitment to appropriate savings before putting up charges and taxes?
Thank you. And the second questioner is Nick Shuo. Gentleman at the back. Sorry, is there a problem?
Yeah, I was just waiting to turn it up.
Okay.
Would the candidates bring a proposition with a simple yes/no answer, please, with the freedom of access to pensions, as in the UK, brought in by the Treasury?
Thank you, Nick. So 2 questions on the MTFP. Have the candidates read it? Yes, no, but obviously you're the candidates. You answer as you see fit. And do you think that the Council of Ministers have made a commitment to the MTFP before raising taxes? Is that correct, John? No. Okay, you better correct me then. Sorry, beg your pardon. Adequate, my shorthand isn't good. Adequately demonstrated their commitment to it.
To savings.
To appropriate savings. And freedom of access to pensions was the question from Nick, as in the UK. So this block of questions will be answered firstly by Mary O'Keefe-Berger. Mary?
Thank you. Yes, I have had the pleasure of reading the mid-term financial plan and the addendum It's very similar to the strategic plan. All the points have come out of the strategic plan and it was made up this plan. The priorities I agree with. It's interesting some of the spending, where the capital is going to go and where the money is going to come from. £100,000 from our strategic reserves, 60,000 and 30,000 respectively. They're going to be taken in chunks. I like the idea of the new schools, the St Mary's, the Kennevy, St Mary's, Kennevy, and what's the school? Rockier. The schools, they would be high on my priority for the spending because we need to invest in education of our youth. Also the sewerage works that need to be reconstructed. I think that's very important because again that comes back to the environment. It looks like some of the nitrates that are causing the sea lettuce is caused by our own human waste, and so we need to have adequate sewage installation really done. Could you just remind me the other bit of that question? I don't know is the answer, because I think time would have to tell if the savings will work, because the savings they put in place between 2013 and 14 did bring the deficit down, but not enough. So I think only time is going to tell. I can't tell at this stage, just being honest. Right, now the other question. Sorry, can you remind me the other question? Okay. Oh, yes.
Okay, thank you, Mary. Call Guy DeFay.
I think the pension question is quite an interesting one. When it was first announced in the United Kingdom, I thought, oh, jolly fair play. You've got this huge pot of money and you're only allowed to get so much and allow people access. However, as this has gone along, there appear to be increasing concerns that people are cashing in their chips and running out of money rather faster than they expected. So I have to say that I cannot give you a straightforward answer on this. I'd really like to see a little longer how it's actually panning out in the UK before we either jump in or don't. My basic principle is, of course, you should have access to your cash, but not actually if you're going to jeopardise your future existence. I really had a really disappointing read of the Ireland plan, the MTFP, which made for pretty grim reading one way or another. No, I don't think for a moment that the Council of Ministers has done anything serious about savings, and where they have, I disagree with their approach. It's the usual fiddling at the margins approach and classic spend and tax, which is more familiarly known as tax and spend. But this is it's a standard approach which has been going on for far too long. And it was great in the old days, of course, when we had more money coming in than was going out. But once the flow of the cash changes in the other direction, you all of a sudden run into difficulties. And the one thing we don't have, regrettably, in our leadership is creativity, lateral thinking, a sense of entrepreneurialism, and all the things we really would like to see out of a government that's going to lead us out of the current fiscal mess.
Thank you, Guy. Call John Young.
Thank you. I'd like to deal with the pension issue first. I think the whole issue of pensions in Jersey needs a radical reform. Certainly when I was a deputy, the previous Social Security Minister and I were at one on this, is because we have a situation where the state's pension scheme is inadequate. 75% of people don't get full pensions. The scheme is inflexible, doesn't deal properly with, the average pension is 75%. I'll correct that statement, I see frowning. The arrangements for private pensions has been liberalised somewhat, but not to the extent that the UK has done. So I think it's good that there's been a reform, albeit a modest one, but I certainly don't think it goes far enough, particularly because I'm not personally satisfied that there is a good enough range of pension providers in the private sector in the island so that people can actually build up decent pensions and have more flexibilities. So I think there is a huge piece of work today, and I'm extremely disappointed that our Social Security Minister and the Council of Ministers have shown no interest in it whatsoever. On the question of the medium-term financial plan, when it was first published, I looked at it online. I really struggled with reading hundreds of pages of small text online. On Friday, I went to the State's bookshop and I picked up the medium financial plan that thick. It requires a huge amount of, it's complex, it's indigestible. I look for that question, where's the savings? Did I find in there evidence that there was real savings? No. A lot of promises. There just wasn't the hard evidence in there, but what I did see, right, I thought, where's the tax? I had to hunt for that, and I found it. Oh boy, did I like it? Absolutely not. And so I think I just don't believe that we need that sort of plan. We need a simpler, more straightforward plan. So have I read every word of it? No. Have I got the gist of it? Yes. And I don't think, personally, if I get elected, I might ask for a delay in the debate to give us time to look at it.
Thank you, John. I call Mike Dunn.
Yes, I've read it. I've attended most of the scrutiny hearings where it's been discussed, and I must say the scrutiny panels, generally speaking, haven't got a clue what's going on because they don't understand it, because they've all got issued with these supplementary financial guidance notes, which the poor old public sitting there haven't got a clue what they're looking at. So complex, they're often giggling and laughing because they don't understand it, and I'm afraid that's it. And there's one word which is missing because the thing was produced before it was even known it was going to happen, apart from Brexit, because it makes no allowance for Brexit, any damage that Brexit might do. And my my personal view, being a pessimist and being a Jeremiah, is that Brexit will sink the plan anyway. The plan doesn't work anyway because it relies upon staff cuts. As you go along to scrutiny, they tell you that staff cuts are the only way of making savings, and that's all they've got. If you make theoretical improvements to your management of your department, it doesn't in fact give you any, you can't quantify any savings that might accrue. So slashing is the number of staff is all they can do. I think it's a useless, it's very complex, it's too complex for mere mortals to read, and I don't think anybody really understands it. And people like the Minister at the Social Security Department, when asked, for example, about the health tax, when was it coming in, what did she know? She knew nothing at all, and that was about 10 days before it was going to be announced. She'd not even been consulted about it. That's the level of understanding at ministerial level. I'm afraid it's a hopeless task. Reference private pension schemes. I wrote to Senator Rosa many, many years ago saying that the provision, the facilities here for tax relief and all the innovative schemes for people to have private pension schemes was inadequate. And he wrote back and assured me it was absolutely adequate. There are loads of people who've arrived in the island, haven't lived here all their life, will have totally inadequate pensions. It's a huge problem that's going to arrive. They're going to have inadequate local states pensions and they're going to have inadequate state private pensions. It's a total neglect, and I'm afraid it's people like Senator Rosa have been asked the questions and they've ignored it.
Thank you, Mike. I now call Nicola Cornu.
On the issue of pensions, I think there needs to be a fundamental commitment to a public pension. And it's one of the reasons why I've always been involved in politics. I want to ensure that at least there is some kind of pension for me at the end, and particularly for the mass of working people in the island. They will have contributed to it for a very long time, and there should be an expectation they get something out of it. It's a very strange Tory policy, and I think it's very dangerous. On the MTFP, I do have a copy, and it's very weighty. And I've struggled with it, and I can't really understand it. I'm not an accountant, but I think it's deliberately obscure. And I've sat through many of the scrutiny panels, in fact most of them, where they've attempted to analyse it with ministers as to what it means, and no one really seems to know. And I, sitting in the public benches, that are not enlightened either. But, John, I'd take issue with you about this idea of appropriate savings before taxation. You're caught in the ideology that we've got to reduce the size of the state before you raise taxes. The problem is the whole thing is broken. You're not raising enough revenue because of the 0-10. You've got to relook again at how do we start taxing companies. How do we introduce a progressive taxation? How do we actually raise enough money in the island for our needs and that they are met?
Thank you, Nick. I call Christian May.
Yes, John, I can say I have had the pleasure of reading the MTFP, all about 180-something pages of it, and I can't admit to reading the addendums, I'm afraid, and I obviously keep it beside the bed for those nights when I'm just not able to get off to sleep. Having looked through it, I see that there is a commitment to saving in there, but do I think it goes to a large enough extent? No, I don't. I think that before we bring in any additional taxation, before we bring in any additional charges, that those savings that are proposed need to be looked at very carefully. As everyone has said, it is a complex document. It does require a lot of analysis, and I think that any candidate who gets in is going to have to spend a lot of time in the few days before the debate making sure that they're on top of those tables that they're being asked to approve. When it comes to the freedom of access to pension funds, I do support such access. I think that those that have contributed to the funds should be able to access them as they wish. I think we have to trust in people being able to manage their own personal finances. I would also like to see growth in personal pensions in Jersey and growth in other financial vehicles where people can save for their future. I've had colleagues who've moved over from England who've said, why is there no Jersey ISA? Why are we not able to manage our funds in that way? And I think we need to be as innovative as we can be when planning for our economic futures.
Thank you, Christian. I call Sam Mezek.
Thank you, John. Yes, I've read it several times. It's probably I'd say at least 3 times as long as it needs to be. The only important bit really are the pages at the end with the numbers, and they are very telling indeed when you see just how little detail is really in them. And anybody that's prepared to vote for something that has no detail on it really is not somebody that should have a role in government. You must understand all the numbers, and the government, the Council of Ministers specifically, hasn't provided those numbers adequately to states members. In terms of whether efficiencies have been properly looked at before tax rises, well, let's remember when the Treasury Minister stood for election as Treasury Minister, he specifically said, and it's in Hansard on the state's website, anyone can find this quote, he said raising taxes must be a last resort. Then the first document that the Council of Ministers came up with, the strategic plan, had at its heart tax rises. That doesn't sound like a last resort to me. That sounds like a first resort, and I think that they broke that promise, and I think they had no intention of ever keeping to it in the first place because they knew the extent of the deficit they'd created. Senator Joseph tried to say when I was on the radio with him recently, oh, no, the reports came out before the election. We did know about those tax rises. Well, where was it in any of their manifestos? I think that's just being dishonest. The Council of Ministers has not properly looked at efficiencies, and we know that when we see chief executives' travel expenses. It's simply out of control, and they're not looking at it properly. And every government report that comes out says this, but they just get put on the shelf and ignored. On pensions, I know that when this was proposed in the UK, there were some concerns about people who might retire and then go out and buy a BMW and then a few years later suddenly find there isn't the money left for it. I'm not inclined to particularly like that point of view because it seems to say that the government always knows better how to spend people's money than those individuals do, and that's not an idea I particularly like. I'd like to see how things go in the UK before we commit to such a drastic change, but the issue of pensions needs a thorough review given that we do have an ageing demographic in the island and we need a fit-for-purpose solution.
Thank you, Sam. I call Hugh Raymond.
Thank you. I spent most of my life in funding, and the thing about funding is that you always had to look at the bottom line to see exactly whether somebody could afford to borrow the money or not. Going back to the MTFP, I started to read it, and then, like most of us here, you tend to look at the back because you want to see what they're intending to do. It's far too complicated, and it's written in I'm not quite sure what they were trying to achieve. The other side of this coin is that the next election is in 2 years' time, and yet the funding plan is for 3 years, is it not? So does that mean we go through 2 years and then the new government comes in and we start looking again? I'm not quite sure what they were trying to achieve, and to be able to go through something like that, you need to be able to understand the accounts and how it works, and also how they came up with that decision, bearing in mind we will have an election in 2 years' time, because I think that the people that come in then will start to change it again. That doesn't help government, and this is one of the reasons why I think that we need to look at the structure and how we look at our funding. And as I said, it's a very difficult document to read, and like you, Christian, it's the bottom of the bed sometimes, but it does really have to be looked at. Freedom to access to pensions, well, if you had access to pensions and you were British Home Stores or you were Austin Reed, you would have lost your pension. So even the big companies are struggling to look after the pensions. I think there should be freedom. There has to be, again, because I remember Eagle Star and everything like that, and Norwich Union and all these companies that I used to deal with. You always think that these big companies are okay, but we definitely have to make sure that the people take out an individual pension. We must have the protection for those people as well, because some people are not very good at handling their money. Thank you.
Thank you, Hugh. Call Stevie Ocean.
Thank you, Madam Connotab. Well, I have looked at the midterm plan, and to be quite honest with you, I only scanned it, and you need an IQ of over 200 to understand it. Mine's only a mere 122. So basically, at the end of the day, it's very, very complicated as such, and I'm far from stupid, but War and Peace was a lot easier to read, I can assure you. On the point of view of pensions, now, the situation is that people earn money when they're in the UK as well, and then come over to Jersey, and I think that should be centralised in this island. Basically, yes, I do believe that you should be able to have your pension released, because to try and talk to HMRC is a nightmare. I've done it myself, and you're on the phone for 2 solid hours and you get nowhere. So from that point of view, I mean, we don't have ISAs or anything like that over here for the simple reason that we've never gone down that road. So as far as that is concerned, and annuities as well as another side of things where you get an income on a regular basis, and they're talking about releasing those in the UK, and maybe that could be implemented in Jersey as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Stevie. And finally, I call Sarah Ferguson.
Yes, savings, one of my favourite topics. Is the Council of Ministers serious about spending less than they earn? Well, the Fiscal Policy Panel said no new taxes, so the Council of Ministers bring them in. If you look at the redundancies that we've had and work out the average salary that they're going to be saving, it indicates that most of the people going are in fact frontline staff, and those are the last ones that we should be getting rid of. You've only to look at the gardens down Victoria Avenue to see the problem. Now, they have been working on a systems approach for savings, and I submitted a Freedom of Information to see how that was going on. They had a number of savings, but they couldn't give me the increase in efficiency or the improvement in outcomes. So they're only saving money by salami slicing. They're not doing it by running efficiently. If you run efficiently, the costs drop out automatically. And I'm also waiting for the Corporate Services report. They've got 2 very good advisors helping, working with them on it, and they've got a very broad, knowledgeable view of the economy and how it works. So I will be reading that very carefully. The departments aren't even looking at what services are essential, which is something they should be doing. Do we need it, or is it essential? You know, or is it just nice to have? Now, pensions, yes, it's a difficult one, this, because whilst I might agree with Guy partially, should government actually dictate your lifestyle? If you want to go and blue your children's inheritance, should the government actually stop you? I don't know. You know, I think you've got to think about that carefully.
Thank you, Sarah. So I'll take 2 more questions, please. And I see this lady here. Mrs. Wilderspin.
Hi, Victoria Wilderspin from Lower St Lawrence. Please could the candidates clarify, if they're successful in this election, would they consider standing again in the next senatorial election? And if so, please can they state today just one thing which they personally hope to achieve in this term of office, which they'll be proud to tell us about at the next St Lawrence Hustings in 20 months' time? Just one thing.
Thank you, Victoria. Is there another? No, sorry, you don't live in St Lawrence, do you? Okay, I'll come on to you in a moment if I have no more questions from my own parishioners. Okay, Steve Cohue at the back there. Sorry, can you wait for the mic, please? The candidates need to be able to hear what you're going to ask them, Steve. I'm sorry? Carry on.
Okay. Stephen Coe, a St Lawrence parishioner. I've been listening to what some of the candidates have been saying about 0-10, and that was forced upon Jersey as a direct result of our affiliation to the EU through the United Kingdom. With the United Kingdom leaving the EU, with the candidates, how far would the candidates consider that we can scrap all the interference from the EU, considering our taxation policies?
Thank you.
Sorry, excuse me. I didn't hear the second half of that question.
Can you repeat the second part of your question, please?
Yeah, it was how far the candidates believe that they could go in the event of Brexit and the United Kingdom leaving the EU, whereby Jersey will no longer be affiliated to the EU through its association with the UK, how far they believe that Jersey could go in scrapping or removing all the taxes, the tax system forced upon Jersey by its relationship with the EU.
Okay, thank you, Steve. Mary, have you got that? Yeah? Okay, thank you. So 2 questions. Election from Victoria Wilderspin. What would you be proud to say at the next election that you had achieved if elected this time? And I think Brexit from Mr. Cohue. So this time, the first person to answer will be Guy DeFay. Guy, you have the floor.
Well, on Brexit, I regret to say I find myself in the same position as most of the voting public in the UK, in that I cannot prophesy anything at all about what's likely to happen over the next 2 to 3 years. In the same way as everyone wanted facts, but it was all crystal ball gazing. It's anyone's guess. My gut feeling is that we should stick with a compliance-based operation that can set its face to the global financial services business and say no drugs money, no criminal money, no dirty money. In respect of the EU outfits, I mean, OPEC is a classic. They had a recent report from their watchdog, which basically slammed OPEC policies over the last 5 years. Say you've got it completely wrong with Greece. You've got it wrong. So I think that actually we should be a little more determined in how we resist these people when they try to interfere. Now, would I stand again? Well, yes, I probably would, because I very much doubt that I'll have seen the reforms I would like to see, which is, with great respect to some of the people in the hall, I'd like to scrap deputies, I'd like to keep the 12 constables, and the rest of the state should be all senators, not just the few we have at the moment. I doubt if I'll see that by next election, but if re-elected, that'll be one of the things I'll be campaigning on. What I hope you will see, and I can turn around and I will claim, is that I believe I have the solution to morning traffic congestion, and it can be fixed, and I intend to fix it, and I hope I'll be able to tell you in 20 months' time, told you so.
Guy, thank you. I call John Young.
Thank you. As I said in my speech, I'm not a career politician. Will I stand in 2 years' time if I got elected? Frankly, I don't know. I believe in crossing one bridge at a time. I think it's what we are in a serious position now. There are a number of major short-term priorities that I've identified in my manifesto, and I believe so a straightforward one is to halt the charges, halt the stealth taxes, and get a proper tax review initiated. If I can achieve that or set it on the roll, and I'm happy to join any group, because there's no ministerial jobs on offer here, the person elected will have to try and persuade ministers to let them work with them or bring propositions or ask questions. That's the only way you can work in the States. The other side of life is I honestly believe that urban agenda and St Helier, and ensuring that St Helier is a good place to live, is vital for the whole island. Otherwise we'll see sprawl of development outside into the country, and we just cannot cut town cram. So those 2 projects I'm prepared to give my whole time on. Now, how far does one go on 0-10? I think it's not just about the EU, it's about the international bodies, which are the OECD, the Group of 20, and the Financial Action Task Force, and so on. There's a broader international agenda of tax to drive out tax avoidance. Now, I think what we have to be very careful, yes, we've got to reform 0-10, but I don't think we can just unilaterally throw it out. My approach would be to bring together some expert people from the private sector to try and sit round the table and see what reforms we can make in the short term and follow up in the longer term. Guernsey's been able to do some modest changes. As an example, they've introduced an intermediate tax for large retail businesses which are predominantly trading in Guernsey. That's an example of the sort of small-scale changes one can do, but it's only a halfway house. The proper review, a Brexit-type review, will address that thing properly.
Thank you, John. I call Mike Dunn.
No, grab me whilst you can. This is my last appearance. I shan't be putting up again if I get elected this time. This is strictly about Brexit. Well, it's not strictly about, there are other things that will come up in the States and I will deal with them, but this is about Brexit. It's so serious, we cannot allow it to go on behind closed doors. We cannot allow secret negotiations. Basically, that's what happened when we got Protocol 3, which is the arrangement now. It was dealt with privately. It was brought to the States, rubber stamped, and that was the arrangement we got. And of course, bear in mind, it was with 3 islands, Jersey, Guernsey, and the Isle of Man. There's no reason to suppose they'll agree to anything that happens in the future. Nobody owns, as I said in my initial speech, nobody knows who owns Protocol 3 now. We don't know who can negotiate on it. So if it's dead in the water, we don't know where it's going to finish up. We simply don't know. The world has so changed since the 1970s. Finance centres are so discredited around the world. You think we're going to get away without being put under the very close microscope. All these islands, all the British overseas territories, all the Jersey, Guernsey and the Isle of Man, we're all going to be examined. France wants the City of London and Paris. Everything's up for grabs. This is not the simple situation. We can't just say, oh, we're separate, we're separate from the United Kingdom, you can't touch us. All that stuff is garbage now. But this is assuming that the UK government does do what the British people have asked, to leave the European Union. We've got huge implications for Jersey, and we've got to deal with them. That's why I want to set up a Brexit group to examine these things, speak for you, meet with you, meet anybody who will speak on this issue to discover what the people actually want, not behind closed doors.
Thank you, Mike. I call Nicola Cornew.
Yes, I will be standing again, most definitely in 2018, as Deputy in District Number 1, St Helier, where I was elected in 2014, and before my seat was robbed from me by the JEP. Now, I won't be standing as Senator, of course, because I would like to see the abolition of such a position. We need one category of states member, all elected on the same day in constituencies of equal size. Call those members deputies if you like, because that's the tradition, and I think that's how it should remain. So there has to be, combined with that, reform of the States Assembly and the electoral system. Now, Mr. Cohu, you asked about 010, etc. Brexit is going to have a major impact on that, but I think we can be pretty certain that the British ruling class is not going to shoot itself in the foot. It is not going to destroy its economy for the section of the community which happen to be nationalist and rather chauvinist and even racist. They are going to maintain their connections with the single market and freedom of movement. That's what's going to come about. But there's going to be real tension and there's going to be battles. Where Jersey will fit into that has yet to be seen, but the constitutional relationship is changing. I think it's great because it allows great opportunity for hopefully the British government to look at these islands and say, it's time to modernise, chaps. Change your economy and also maybe change your democracy because you haven't got one. Thank you.
Thank you, Nick. I call Christian May.
Would I stand again in 20 months? I think that would depend on whether I'd had the opportunity to see through as many of the 10 pledges that I've laid out in my manifesto. If I could focus on just one of them across the 20 months, I think it would be ensuring that we have a fair and efficient student loans scheme so that we can make sure that those students who want to go to university have the opportunity to do so. It's not the most exciting pledge, it's not going to change the world for everyone in the island, but for young people who really want to be educated and come back and offer their services to the island, it will make a big difference for the future. When it comes to the relationship with the United Kingdom and whether we should look to changing 010 after Brexit, we're still going to have a relationship with the OECD, we're still going to have a relationship with FATF, and we're still going to have the long arm reach of US extraterritoriality. What we need to do is use the opportunity to look at our taxation policy generally, but to just scrap what we have, I think, would be very risky. We have a very successful finance industry which employs almost 60% of the workers in the island. We need to look at diversifying our economy. We need to look at other ways of bringing investment to the island. But when it comes to the finance industry, it's robust, we're very well regulated, and I think that jurisdictions around the world appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you, Christian. I now call Sam Mezek.
Nick, your seat was not robbed from you by the JP. Your own remarks did that, and I think you should learn the lessons of that before you attempt to serve the public of this island in future. In terms of would I stand again, I'm 25 years old, young and fit, rearing to go. Yes, I hope I would. I won't say 100% definite because you never know what life is going to throw at you, but my intention absolutely would be. And I would like my achievement at the next election that I can boast about to have stopped the health tax. I think that introducing stealth charges is a dangerous, slippery slope. If we're having problems with revenue that government is making, we should be looking at the taxes we already have, not introducing new ones and creating extra bureaucracy, extra administration costs by doing that. It's the wrong way of doing it, and I believe that I can achieve that because I will bring that amendment in the coming weeks, and if I'm elected in this election, I can stand in the States Assembly and say, here it is, this is what the public have cast their verdict on, so change direction. And I hope that the public will give me the opportunity to do that. Steve, excellent question on 010 and the EU, and it is very difficult to answer it when we simply don't know what the future is going to be, whether Brexit will actually happen, because there's question marks over that. I think it probably will happen, because I think governments which ignore referendums don't tend to go down too well with the public, as that has also been seen in Jersey as well. I think that it will happen, and what will happen to Protocol 3 is simply impossible to tell. I would like as much of that current arrangement to continue, but if that arrangement allows change to 010 so that we can bring more businesses into that 10% rating, absolutely we should do that, because it is right that businesses trading and making profits in Jersey pay tax, but we also need to protect that 0% rate for that part of our economy whose viability depends on it. So we can't shoot ourselves in the foot too much here, but I would like to see more businesses brought into that 10% rating.
Thank you, Sam, and I now call upon Hugh Raymond.
I'm of the same opinion. If having sort of been so close to some of the ministers and some of the departments, it will be interesting, if elected, to go on the inside looking out as opposed on the outside looking in. I too would make that decision, and I think that it's how much you can achieve in the 2 years that we're there. I'm not quite sure which way I would go on it, but I have no intention of making it short term. I've involved myself, as you know, very much into the actual running of the island on a volunteer basis, so to be able to come on the inside and the monetary side doesn't really reflect on it. But I would like to think possibly that I would stand again. With regards to 010, the biggest problem you have with 010 is that the island can it be an independent island? Can it be? Our legislation is so much geared to the UK, and I think that with all the issues going on with Brexit, it's going to cause too many problems. And I think the other side of the coin is that although the referendum said that we're coming out of Brexit, I just wonder at the end of the day, even what Mike does say, how we will come out, because I'm not sure that, I'm absolutely positive that both Germany and France just want us in, even if it's to keep those two apart, because Italy and Spain want to make sure that they play the game. Although we've come out, I think we'll be very much closer in, and we do depend on Europe to make our finance industry work. And the other thing to remember about, which I've always learned from the old days of being in the UK, and that is that it's better to have a jurisdiction like Jersey 60 miles down the road than it is to have it 3,000 miles across the other side of the world. And that's one of the implications, that we would actually stay within this setup, and I would totally support that. I think whatever Mike says, Brexit will make a difference, but I think it's important that we do remain fairly close to the UK. They give us our bread and butter, and you have to remember that.
Thank you, Hugh. I now call upon Stevie Ocean.
Thank you, Madam Connotar. Well, the situation is, first of all, with Brexit, and it is going to affect all of us, unfortunately. And basically, it's a situation which, what happened in the UK originally, everybody was misled. Everybody. They were lied to and everything else because they think they can get control. We're outside the EU as such. I know, and you all know yourselves, what is possible and what isn't. Boris Johnson, Michael Gove, and Nigel Farage made the biggest mistake ever. And I don't know if you've ever seen the film Brewster's Millions, where on the end of the film, the late Richard Pryor actually turns round and he runs for election as mayor, and it was a case of voting for none of the above, and he got elected. But you see, the thing is, at the end of the day, I don't really think that they wanted that to happen with you know, leaving the EU, and they've made the biggest mistake ever. I do believe that the Prime Minister is actually trying to elongate this, and it's going to possibly go to 2019 before anything happens. This is something that's in the works. As far as 2010 is concerned, and the other aspects of Protocol 3, we have got to maintain the status quo of what we've got, because otherwise we're going to have a lot of problems as far as these trade costs and everything else, which we would incur, which we don't incur at the moment. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Stevie. Now it's Sarah Ferguson.
Thank you. One thing my master's degree in business administration from Columbia in New York taught me was to do my research. There's a lot of scaremongering going on here about Brexit. Frankly, if you look at the very useful document that the Minister for External Relations has prepared on Jersey's trade, in actual fact, the bulk of our trade is with the rest of the world and with the UK. So, you know, think about that, folks, because is it quite so desperate? Obviously, we will be affected by the OECD and the EU through they're forever talking about the harmful tax. The UK are intending more legislation regarding offshore jurisdictions. So, you know, we're going to be having Google's bowled at us from all directions. You know, and other onshore jurisdictions will be gunning for us. There's talk of an onshore, offshore, if you see what I mean, in Edinburgh. 010, we could make it 510. We need to obviously have the discussions. 010, though, is an on-island tax avoidance scheme where you leave your profits in the company until the company is sold, and then bingo, your profits become capital and you don't pay tax on them. The UK is actually in the EEA, but it should apply to join EFTA. And I would like a full tax review with a cost-benefit examination of 010, just to see what it does to our island economy.
Sarah, thank you. Finally, I call Mary O'Keefe-Berger.
Victoria, I'd like to address your question first. As long as I have the drive and the energy and the passion that I feel now, I would stand again. If I didn't feel that way, I wouldn't. One of the reasons I actually decided to stand was in my role as a centeneer for the parish of St. Saviour. What I find is sometimes I find people who are in utter despair and they're suffering from depression. And recently I had a young boy who's 25, well, I said boy, young man, 24 years of age. And he said to me things like, my life is really awful. My life is miserable. I want to go to prison. He's 24 years of age and he was depressed and he was so sad and miserable. So I suggested to him, why don't you have a chat with your GP? And he said, I can't afford to. I really was upset when I heard that. Then only a week later, I had another man in crying, clearly suffering from depression, in despair. And he said exactly the same thing, I can't afford to see the GP. So I thought to myself, I've got to make this right. I've got to find a way where people can access mental health services immediately. So what I'd like to do, and I'd be very proud if I achieve this, is to have a little change to the law where referrals can be made directly from centeneers, lawyers and police officers who find people in front of them in despair, and they can do referrals direct to mental health services. That's the one thing that I'd be very proud of if I could achieve, because it was the main motivation for making me to stand. But there are lots of other things that I'd like to do also. Back to our Brexit. Not as worried as Brexit. I think we've got a lot of really good exchange agreements in place already. I can't see why they will be disrupted. And I think we should continue to forge those relationships. And I think we should look at other jurisdictions also.
Mary, thank you. We have time for 2 more questions. Are there any of my parishioners who wish to ask questions? You can ask another one if you've already asked one. It's your parish. No, sorry, this is Mr. Mara, this is for parishioners of St Lawrence. Would you like to ask one? Okay, Deputy Lefondre, would you like to ask another one? Simple, please. Thank you, that's a nice, simple question. Is there anyone else, Mr. Mara? Sorry? Okay. Thank you, Deputy Lefondre, who asked about the role of the bailiff, and Mr. Mara, who asked about the future role of the Connétable in the island. Okay, so this time, the first person to answer is John Young.
Thank you. The bailiff. I certainly found absolutely no difficulties at all in when I sat in the States Assembly from 2011 to 2014. I always found the bailiff very helpful. I never saw any examples myself of where there are inappropriate interventions and so on. So I don't think there's any practical issues at all with the bailiff chairing our assembly. I think it's more likely that if the bailiff were to go, there are practical issues finding a member who would actually sit in the role of chairmanship, because they would have to become neutral and give up their constituency role. So that's a problem. I do know, of course, having spent some time in other jurisdictions, that there is a theoretical issue about this, and there are those that want to make mischief and criticise us, who will say, you know, this breach of this conflict of powers makes somehow the Channel Islands a corrupt place. I don't share that view at all. I don't, but I understand that the people will pose that. So I would personally, I'm entirely happy with it. There's an issue of civic role. I feel much more comfortable with a bailiff representing the island on civic matters than I do the Chief Minister. I think the Chief Minister really is not the appropriate body to be making public statements on behalf of the people in Jersey when these things happen. On the future role of the constables, my position on the constables, I think, was largely responsible, or quite a big element, in me not being elected in the senatorial elections last time, because I've always believed that the constables are vital to Jersey. They're a key part of the whole island life, and one sees in other jurisdictions constables are weak, and we need to do that. I want to strengthen the constable's role. I want to give them planning powers. I want to give them much more delegated powers and authority, community planning, but... Beg pardon? Well, at the end of the day, I would not personally see that I did not support the constables being members of the States Assembly, but I think that decision is now made on a referendum, and we have to live with it.
Thank you. Thank you. John, call on Mike Dunn.
Yes, I think, because I live a boring life, I attended virtually every hearing of the Lord Carswell hearings on about the role of the bailiff. I submitted about 4 papers, and I'm glad to say the result of the hearing was that the bailiff should be removed from the States, not because he's done anything particularly wrong, but because it's incompatible. My own feeling is there should be a Department of Justice. A Department of Justice, the bailiff would be much better off sitting in there. The greffier is perfectly capable of chairing the States meetings. There's no reason why at all they have to lose a States member. McGonigal versus UK international case with the Court of Human Rights virtually finished off the Lord Chancellor in the UK, and it did have implications as far as Guernsey was concerned. And I think, as Lord Carswell said, the interpretation of it as far as Jersey will no doubt be looked at again in the future. So I think It's something that has to be grasped. The constables, I led the no campaign, the no referendum. I spoke to the greffier, the state's greffier at the time. I said, look, I want to do the no campaign if nobody else does. He said, well, if nobody better comes forward, you can do it. So obviously there's nobody better to run a campaign than me. So I did the no campaign. I got 9,000 people voted that the constables should not automatically be in the states. And I think that's right. But I think the constables have got a role. I think the parishes could be much improved. They could be 12 much more efficient parishes, concentrating on parish issues, providing a lot more information, making all their activities much more public. They could do a wonderful role, and they can be consulted from states matters, but they shouldn't have the vote in the states. But I think they have a very valuable role, and they're part of the identity, but there's no reason why we should lose them, but they shouldn't be in the states. They can go there and get elected separately if they want to do that, that's up to them, but not automatically. And that's still my view.
Thank you, Mike. I now call upon Nicola Cornew.
Yes, the Carswell report has clearly indicated that there needs to be this separation of powers, that the bailiff should no longer chair the assembly. The problem is it's the political class in Jersey, completely ossified. Their fear is that power will fall from their hands were they to modernise, democratise, and reform the system. I mean, those 70% who don't vote, they fear them. They fear that there could be real change. Why? Because they fear that their finance industry is going to collapse because people start voting. So they therefore need to keep control. Now remember, the Crown officers are unelected. They're very powerful, and they have been historically and remain so. They're part of Jersey's political class. The constable's role, well, that should clearly change. They shouldn't be this ex officio, by right, part of the states. There should be one category of states member all elected on the same day in constituencies of equal size. The constables, that position will remain, but they're not directly in the chamber. Last time, 2014, I think 10 out of the 12 faced an uncontested election. I think the one in St. Wands was the first in 109 years or something ridiculous like that. That shows that the system is broken. I think we all know that. We've got to embrace a reformed and modernised electoral system. The world isn't going to change radically. The sky isn't going to collapse. But it's expected, and I think the British government is looking for that reform. Brexit may bring it.
Thank you, Nick. The next person to answer is Christian May.
I have huge respect for the bailiff, for the holder of the office, and for the history of the office. I've seen the bailiff in the court many times on a variety of matters, from fraud to crime to complex trusts. And I do believe that the role of the bailiff within the State's Chamber does need to change. I don't think he should be the elected Speaker. That's for two reasons. Firstly, it is a breach of the separation of powers. We shouldn't have a Speaker who could either be conflicted or to even have the perception of a conflict. But the main reason, actually, that I would like to see the bailiff take a step away from the role of Speaker is that he is such an accomplished jurist, and all those who've held that office are. We have a backup of judgments in the Royal Court at the moment. We're having to bring increasing numbers of commissioners over from England to deal with Jersey judgments, and I think the role of the bailiff and the deputy bailiff would be much better served working in the court, looking at the trusts issues, and looking primarily at the complex criminal issues that come before the court on a day-to-day basis. I think the role of the constable is one that's been evolving, and I think they are absolutely essential to the parish. Many parishioners see them as their key point of contact when they want something dealt with in the State's Assembly. We have had a referendum on this issue, and the people of the island have decided that the constable should remain in the Assembly. I was the only candidate in Free and Full St Helier back in 2014 who supported the outcome of the referendum, and as I imagine many of you can picture, I was not particularly popular because of that, but I believe that if the people of the island have spoken on the role of the constable, then that's where they should remain until we hold a further referendum.
Christian, thank you. I now call upon Sam Mezek.
On the bailiff, I agree with much of what Christian has just said. I believe that there are lots of people in our community who hold the respect of the public and have that gravitas, who would make excellent presiding officers of the States Assembly. My personal choice would be Constable Len Norman of St Clement. I think he's presided over the States Assembly previously, does an absolutely fantastic job, and he'd be prepared to do it for £46,000 a year, whereas the bailiff, which is on a salary closer to £300,000 a year, would be better off in the court getting those judgments done. And I don't see any conflicts between that and allowing him to continue with his civic role. I think that's the best way forward, and I think it would be good for Jersey democracy to do that. On the role of the constable, my long-term view is that I believe that Jersey democracy would be best served by us having one category of states member elected in a system where every voter has an equal vote. I accept, though, that there was a result in a referendum which said that the constable should remain. I've been working on a subcommittee of the Privileges and Procedures Committee, actually also with the Constable of St Lawrence, and we've been looking at options for reform which respect that referendum result, which also maintain the role of senators, but look at what we can do with the deputy system to make that fairer across the island. I will support the implementation of a system of redistribution of deputies in the short term, but longer term I believe we should only have one category of elected states member where everybody, no matter where you live in the island, has an equal vote. I think that would be the most democratic way forward, and I think more democratic societies end up with more accountable governments which get better outcomes, and if we had a more democratic and accountable government, maybe we wouldn't be facing the situation we are now with such a big financial black hole and tax rises on the horizon. I think that having a better democratic system would allow us to have better government outcomes.
Thank you, Sam. I now call upon Hugh Raymond.
Not quite sure where I start, because the group of people that I deal mostly with, looking at my colleague on the left over there, are the constables. I have gone through, and this question came up earlier on. Believe it or not, having dealt with them over the last 5-6 years, I think it's essential that the constables remain where they are. The only thing I would make is that I think that sometimes there's so much work to do in the parishes that I think that they may perhaps start to wander off into other areas of legislation and departments. And I think it's so important that each one represents its parish, and I think it's the ideal situation where somebody does look after that parish. The trouble is, if you take constables, bailiffs, we've had 800 years of history. Once you start knocking one, you're going to knock the lot. The legislation, and there's lawyers in here tonight, the legislation to change everything in that situation is going to take some time. The laws are written via the bailiff downwards right the way through. This is going to take time. If it's not broken, why repair it? For goodness sake, there is more important issues. I think it's a discussion, and I think the discussion should be made. But there are more important issues, more important things to be looking at than looking at whether the bailiff stays in and whether the constables stay in. I think that we need to just sit back and say, right, let's have a discussion over a period of time. But from my own point of view and from the work that I do with them, I would like still to see the constables stay where they are, and I really don't think even what Christian does say with regards to the bailiff's role. I think once you start changing the bailiff, just look at our laws, and I think it's essential that we keep both of them where they are at the same time. There's other things to do other than looking at the bailiff, but it is open for discussion.
Thank you, Hugh. I now call upon Stevie Ocean.
Thank you very much, Madam Constable. The situation is this. Basically, when it comes to the separations of powers, I mean, this is an old chestnut that goes back a long, long time. I mean, when I was chairman of the Jersey Rights Association and one of its founders, this came up so many times. Now, look, this island is beautiful and a unique place to live. Why change what we have here? Because people want to change things. And as Hugh just rightly said, once you start integrating and messing around with things, unfortunately, the whole thing will fall apart and you'll lose the tradition of the way that things are done on this island. And I think that the powers of the bailiff should remain as they are, and he should remain in the chamber. When it comes to the constables, they play a vital role in the chamber. When I was chairman of the Jersey Rights Association, we actually put a proposition forward that we would take the constables out except the biggest parish, which was St Helier. He would speak on behalf of all of the other parishes. But as far as I'm concerned, the constable should remain within the chamber. And also, if I could just interject just 1 second, that lady's question I didn't answer, I'm very sorry. Yes, I would stand again in 2 years' time, and I intend to start a film commission, which is going to be a conglomerate of the 5 islands to bring money into this island. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Stevie. I now call upon Sarah Ferguson.
Thank you. If we're into reform, perhaps we could have the ancient Greek system, where once a year the whole population could vote your most unfavourite politician out of power. There was a case in Guernsey about the bailiff, and it was taken to the Court of Human Rights, and the court approved the bailiff sitting in the States because of the way they set the procedures up. So I think that sorts that for the moment. The Conitabs used to hold parish assemblies to discuss controversial matters of importance to the parish, which is similar to the Swiss canton position, and the public view would be transmitted to the States. But the Conitabs don't do this so much now, and I think they're losing a trick. I think that the impetus of some of the charges, the waste charges, for example, will be centralising services which were run by the parishes. We lost control of welfare with the income support system and the way it was implemented, so that the parish system is being eroded, and we need to take care not to lose a valuable honorary system. I certainly support the Conitabs, but I think they need to do a bit more about taking the views of their parishioners to the parish, to the States. I think that is absolutely essential. If they don't, they will end up out on the scrap heap.
Thank you, Sarah. I now call upon Mary O'Keefe-Berger.
Yes. In 1257, Henry III allowed Jersey to have the role of the bailiff. Who were we in 2016 to suddenly decide out with the bailiff? I think it would be very wrong. I also think on the matter of the backlog in the courts, it might be worth having another deputy bailiff who could take the strain off the work, because obviously we've got increasing work in the courts, and also there's other roles that the bailiff needs to do, which is busier than he used to be. So no, I would not be in favour of getting rid of the bailiff. And with regards to the constables, having worked with my constable in St Saviour, I sort of get the whole parish system an awful lot more than I did. I understand the vital link that they have between the parish and between the States of Jersey Assembly. I would not like to see this go either. I think it's important that we keep our constables in the Assembly. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. And finally, to answer the questions as the last candidate this evening, I call upon Guy Defay.
Firstly, a brief apology. In answer to the one of the last questions, I had a moment of acronym dyslexia when I referred to OPEC, when, of course, I meant the OECD. Nevertheless, the OECD watchdog did slam them over just about everything done in Europe for the last 6 years. Look, ladies and gentlemen, let's get this right. The States Assembly is a legislature, and to me, it makes entirely appropriate sense that the President of the States Assembly, as the bailiff, is a person who understands the island's laws from top to bottom. He's previously been Deputy Bailiff. He'll have probably sat in as Attorney General or Solicitor General of the States. That's normally the way forward. And it's absolutely vital, A, to have that person in the chair knowing Jersey law, and B, that they have the ability of a judge. Judges are trained in a specific way, particularly to be even-handed. Now, this separation of powers stuff is nonsense. All you're hearing is words from people who don't understand standing orders. Regrettably, that's most of the state's members. These are the rules by which debate is carried out. The bailiff is absolutely stitched up 100% by standing orders. He used to have the casting vote. Not anymore. If it's a draw, he has to go with the status quo. That was the last political initiative he had until a bunch of people who didn't think about this very closely asked more recent bailiffs, would they stop states members from repeating themselves? Now, I know that will come with vast acclaim here, but it was not a good move. Finally, on the constables, I would change their rule and reduce the bureaucracy. Do we have to get dog licenses every year? Can't you get dog license for life? Do we have to do the same for the driving license? Can't we have one until we're 65, 70? And so it goes on. But it's down to them.
Okay, well, in thanking Guy as being the last candidate to speak this evening, I'd like to take the opportunity to thank all of you for coming to St Lawrence to hear the candidates, to the timekeeper, and of course to the candidates themselves. This is the fourth hustings of, I think, 12 or maybe 13, so I'm sure they're finding their way now and getting used to what is expected of them. For all parishioners of St Lawrence, just to remind you that polling day is on Wednesday the 7th of September. The polling station is here at the parish hall, and it is open from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. for you to come and cast your vote, and do please do that. And obviously, anyone who doesn't live in St Lawrence, please cast your vote where you are registered to do so. So it's just gone 9:30. Thank you again, and I'm declaring the meeting closed.